Okay, so I will start with the history of the conservation movement. So when you're talking about the origins of the conservation movement, I'm pretty sure that you are legally required to talk about two things, including the Dust Bowl and Hugh Hammond Bennett. So the Dust Bowl was an event, a series of events in the 1930s in the Midwest that resulted after World War I from overcultivation of soils combined with drought conditions for several years. And so what happened is it resulted in these significant dust storms, frequent and significant, that created a threat both to human health, to animal health, to property, and ultimately required a lot of people to leave the land. Just it wasn't tenable to continue with it. And so Hugh Hammond Bennett, this is a magnet from my fridge, courtesy of the Soil and Water Conservation Society, was one of, he's known as the father of conservation. So he was a soil surveyor. He co-wrote an influential piece, Soil Erosion, a National Menace, in 1928. And he was the first director of the Soil Erosion Service created in 1933, which essentially was kind of a pilot project to demonstrate the effectiveness of soil erosion practices in response to some of the early events in the Dust Bowl. He was a really influential speaker and very passionate about conservation. And so when that Soil Erosion Service started to run out of funding in 1935, he addressed Congress to ensure that that the project continued, basically. And so he gave that address to Congress. He timed it with a dust storm that happened to be rolling into DC at that time. And he was successful in convincing Congress to establish the Soil Conservation Service, which ultimately became the Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS. So in 1937, Franklin Roosevelt was president by then, and he had sent a letter to all of the state governors with sample legislation recommending enactment of soil conservation district legislation in each state. It includes a quote that you may have heard: "The nation that destroys its soil destroys itself." And so the proposed act suggested establishing districts to direct and manage soil erosion control programs, using local citizens participating voluntarily in planning and installing conservation practices. So each district would be empowered to determine local needs, would have personal contact with local individual landowners within the community, and would be able to encourage maximum cooperation on a voluntary basis. And that's basically still the same template that we adhere to today. So the very first conservation district in the nation was established in 1937 in North Carolina, Hugh Hammond Bennett's home state and district. And then Maryland wasn't far behind, with Kent County forming the first soil conservation district in 1938. And so within the next 20 years, all of the districts in Maryland were formed. And so here is a screenshot of that legislation in Maryland, and that is still in Maryland's code today. So a lot of the powers and roles and responsibilities that we're going to talk about later on in the presentation were first established in this enabling legislation.